Right, moving on at the end of the question. I mean, do you think that, how do you think that sort of, especially with the work that you've done, sort of with the idea of murder chez Proust, or even, Le Fantôme, do you think that, what do you think integrity means to a work like Proust when you are adapting in that manner? Or how,
For me, writing Murder chez Proust, Meurtre chez Proust was really a divertissement. So I didn't take it that seriously, frankly. I have my serious scholarly work on the one hand, and I have my divertissement on the other. So to me, Murder chez Proust is just a divertissement. I didn't want to do literary criticism. I didn't mean to sacralize Proust. I thought it was fun. I did it for fun.
Well, if we could all be so successful in our hobbies, that would be nice.
Well, I think the Oulipian approach, to continue my Oulipian boostership, is sort of riding the place where those two things meet, where the having fun with Proust and being engaged in serious literary creation, where those two blur into each other. Again, with the fruit fly thing, I think integrity in a work like Proust means, what if every single word were different? If you retold, it's like how poetry is what's lost in translation. If you retold Swann's Way in a completely different language, or you weren't allowed to use any of the same words, but some core would remain, what is that? Like if you took The Old Man and the Sea and you wrote it in the style of Faulkner, what would you get out of that? And I think that's that irreducible, presumably intangible thing is what maybe worth trying to get at. Maybe maybe that's what you want to evaluate as a literary critic, or maybe just for the fun of it to find out what that is. Can I give a quick non-Perec Oulipian example of Raymond Queneau, who was a co-founder of the Oulipo before, in 1951, I think, wrote a book called Exercices de Style, Exercises in Style, where he takes a very mundane anecdote about seeing a guy on a crowded bus who gets in a minor scuffle with another passenger, and then 2 hours later he sees him in front of the Gare Saint-Lazare, and a friend of his is telling him that he should move a button up on his coat. He has that anecdote, and he tells it in 99 different styles. And so he tells it in iambic pentameter, and he tells it in, youth slang, and he tells it in extremely florid romantic prose, and just, it's the same kind of approach, but in that case it's not the core of a novel that he's trying to replicate or disperse so much that it becomes clear collectively. It's just this moment from everyday life, and every way you could possibly express it, you're choosing some style that's gonna hide certain parts of the irreducible and display others.
Sean, you look like it's
in a way, I think, if I may, that Proust would disagree with you, because I'm speaking on behalf of Proust. I'm Proust, and Proust was a great flatterer. He loved everyone. That's the way he managed to do something in Paris too. He was a great flatterer. He loved everyone. The only writer he hated was Charles Péguy. I imagine Péguy is not very well known here, but he was very famous in France before the First World War, and he was an essayist, a very famous one. And Proust said, je ne comprends pas comment on peut écrire comme Péguy, il emploie 100 phrases quand on devrait en employer une seule. I can't get why you can write like Péguy. He uses 100 sentences when there's only one to be used. So to Proust it was not a game. A sentence was a sentence. It was not a question of joliesse or style. It was a question of not having any distance between what he had to say and the way of saying it, I would say. And then, as for integrity, Proust gave us the answer. He said, dans mon roman, personne n'enfile un par-dessus pour rien. Would you translate that in the old style? Personne n'enfile un par-dessus. Enfile.
In my novel, no one Puts on.
Yeah, puts on
Puts one
an
something
overcoat,
over another.
but par-dessus is a very old one. So he wanted to say no one puts on an overcoat for no reason, and maybe it's not true, but that was what he wanted, and that was his idea of the novel. So there's no trick in a good novel. There's no trick in À la recherche du temps perdu. No one has a gesture which is not justified in the end. That's the idea. That's, to answer you, probably the integrity of Proust.
I mean, I think
Did you
that,
write longtemps j'ai toussé de bonheur?
Le bonheur.
Ah oui, là-dessus, longtemps j'ai toussé le bonheur. That was le bonheur for Marcel Proust to have.
well, I mean, I think that obviously rewriting requires, or pastiche, or even an exercise in style like Criminal, which was exhausting, exercise on its own. I think that it requires us to have well explored the original territory, and I think maybe the most obnoxious question I'm going to ask is, do you think that art or greatness can happen in the act of rewriting?
Can I answer?
Please.
Yes,
do.
yes.
I only have 2 words, Euripides and Jean Racine. He rewrote, Racine rewrote Iphigenie or whatever play by Euripides that you can imagine. So, and I think it's not a bad right.
And of course, La Fontaine rewrote Aesop, and we have many examples in French literature of rewriting, which is very successful.
And John Ritchie, writing City of Nights, is the rewrote Marcel Proust in a way. Wouldn't you say that? You have a hustler like Morel, you have an old guy paying younger guys to get sex, which is Le Baron Charlus. You have an adept of S&M, which could be the narrator. It works.
Works. I mean, I think Racine is a bit of a cop. It's like, I don't know. It's like saying, does anybody after Socrates have a good idea? Where there was Kant. It's like you can't. I don't know. I mean, I think. Do you think there's any styles, I guess, that work best with rewriting? I mean, with Racine and Euripides, they stuck to the same. Obviously not, but to an extent they stayed in the same form. Do you think there's a form that works best for rewriting or an exercise like this? I mean,
In what sense?
a style or a medium of any sort that works most effectively. Because when Proust did Le Moine, there was, he didn't, as you said, it was more in a way of identifying ideas inside of a text. But also he did tinker with style, and I was wondering, do you think that he would have lost it if he'd only done one sentence like Pérec? You've adapted, I think, into so many different forms, like even what you call your divertissement, which does not, allow you to not answer questions about it. I think, do you think that one thing was easiest to work with? Do you think that there was, when you're working with something that is so long and so well done, do you think that there's a form that it molds to best when you're taking it out of the original?
Okay, let me try to explain that I worked with the text, and then I wanted to have fun with the text. That was the difference, I think, for me. So I decided to choose a mystery genre, because I also know that for some people it's very difficult to enter à la recherche du temps perdu. I know that, I'm aware of that. Not for us, obviously, but for other people. And I thought it would be a good way to have une petite porte, a little door, to big work. And it worked because people, would read Murder chez Proust or La Décomposition or, anything else, and then they would not be intimidated by the text itself anymore. And it's just like a marchepied, the first step towards reading the work itself. And I do trust that it works.
I'm not sure that Proust is difficult to read. Proust is easy to read. What's difficult to
Well,
read
you even said that it was
50
hard.
Shades of Grey. It's so poorly written. That's true. It's just a question of respiration, and you know the rhythm of respiration, and then you read Proust. It's really easy. That has to be told to people. It's easy to read.
I think you have the right glasses. You know what he says in Time Regained? He says, my book is for people, you know, it's like an optic instrument, and it is good for some people and it is not good for other people. And that's all right. It doesn't matter I'm wrong, it doesn't matter I'm right. It's just that you do not have les bons yeux pour me lire, the
Exactly.
good eyes to read me. So you do have the right glasses.
I think we're running out of time, but I think we want to ask questions. If anybody has questions for anybody, please. Yeah, you.
I'm particularly taken with Professor Desangeans's idea about the utility of the pastiche preparing to write the novel. And in my mind, I saw art students sitting up there, easels in the Louvre to do Delacroix before they worried about doing their own thing. But there is an element in this, and I'm getting sideways in a question to try to avoid giving offense particularly to Mr. Becker. There is also an element to me that I always found in the pastiches of playfulness. Well, when you come to the experimentation and the constraints of Oulipo, I kept feeling sort of the odor of pataphysics there. And at your university, I once spoke to a room full of sober social scientists about pataphysics, and
Sober social scientist.
Yes.
Disaster.
The worst kind.
I'm sorry.
The worst kind. And for maybe 10 or 12 minutes, I kept a straight face before I lost it. Because there was in that just wonderful, they were making some points, but there was a playful way that they were making the point. And so that leads me to ask, and particularly in light of what Mr. Dantzig said, I think quite correctly, about how Proust would not agree that you can puncture the style and still have the same novel. If you show, through constraints, the robustness of the text, that it can stand up to these changes, besides, in the first place, I wonder about playfulness, and I wonder if Proust, hearing of your
We
experiment...
have a rule: the questions can't be longer than the answer.
Okay.
It's a Proustian question.
Yeah, it's a Proustian question. We only have so much
I'm
time.
trying to avoid offense. The Proust would
No, go ahead, offend.
in a closet with a fourrier. Because the question is, so you see that it robust, it stands up to those challenges. Then my question is, donc, so what exactly have you shown about the novel and its quality, except that there's so many words you can remove a little bit of it and there's still a lot left?
Not offended.
I'm sorry.
Far from the first time I've been presented with that kind of donk. I think you have proven less about the novel in question and more about the novel with a capital N, or just the form, the plasticity of the form and the utility of this or that structure. In a sense, and we could debate the utility of this also, but you're taking something as robust and successfully accomplished as La Recherche and hollowing it out and saying what works and what doesn't, and what could I use if I were to write a novel. To make the intangible things that we like about art and we like about literature, to make those tangible, and say, to, I guess, untangle certain strands of the aesthetic process and use what we like and get rid of what we don't. Which, I guess, goes back to what I said about how, in a way, writing is, for some people, just the most authentic way of reading something.
So no playfulness.
Tremendous playfulness.
Okay.
Although, Yeah, and there are different rationales for why you would play in a certain way. The pataphysics is very playful, but also I think very dark and very ultimately very despairing philosophy about the world. And Oulipian creation is a lot lighter, but also seeking to understand how things work, because if that's something that you care about, if understanding why, if reading Proust is something that's meaningful to you, then there's a certain comfort and certain security in understanding how it works and why it does to you what it does. So playfulness, but not always just for the play. Sometimes it masks something more serious.
Other questions? Even the back, yeah.
You mentioned the first sentence of À la recherche in Swann's Way, and it was rewritten many times. And for someone who's a reader for whom French is a second language, it seems like a peculiar sentence. The verb tense doesn't seem right, and if you gave it to your 7th grade French teacher, she'd say this isn't right. And I'm wondering for the native French speakers whether it seems a natural sentence, and to say je me suis couché de bonheur, and not je me couché de bonheur, or something like that.
Yes, if you were Flaubert, you would probably have used an imperfect, l'imparfait. Longtemps, je me couchais de bonheur, which is the right grammatical form of the verb, you know. But of course, it shows le passé composé, which makes the sentence completely different.
I'll add that.
Well, it's a more proper way of speaking French. Longtemps je me suis couché de bonheur. I can see how you could use le parfait or...
Un imparfait de répétition, le repetitive imperfect.
Longtemps je me couchais de bonheur,
Yeah.
that's imparfait.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, it was a trick for once, because I think that the idea of Proust was to nouer le lacet, how would you say it? To tie the laces. Because it's very simple. The first word is longtemps, which contains the word temps, time. And then the last word of the novel is temps as well. So it's a little trick. He needed that in order to impress hasty readers.
You're not going anywhere for a while. Get comfortable. I'll just add that there's
He's a teacher. You have le temps, you finish by le temps, and then you don't get out of le temps. He's a very heavy writer.
The Harry Matthews, who's the other American member of the Oulipo, has done the same set of operations on the sentence to be or not to be. That is the question for anyone who's interested in, who doesn't read French and is interested in seeing that Oulipian experiment elaborated on. So in that case, it's to see or not to see, to flee or not to flee, to pee or not to pee, etc.
In that sense, Oulipo has been invented by Voltaire, who was the first French translator of Shakespeare, amazing as it is. And he translated, because he went to England, and he came back with Shakespeare, if I may say, and he translated Hamlet in Alexandrin Rimet, which is not the most evident way to translate Shakespeare. So that is Oulipo, isn't it? Couldn't it be?
In some ways. Depends.
I think we have,
You
yes.
consider translation, to what extent would you consider that rewriting of the original? Obviously, it is a rewriting. Every translation can't avoid it being a rewriting. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, Proust himself was a translator with the help of his mother. But what, yeah, but what is interesting is that in his Time Regained, he explains la tâche et le devoir d'un écrivain sont ceux d'un traducteur. The task and the duty of a writer are those of a translator, because he thought that it was not a matter of translating English into French. It was a matter of translating what he calls le livre intérieur, the inner book, into a book that everybody can recognize. And that, to him, translation was indeed rewriting, I think.
When I read Ruskin in English,
Mm-hmm.
I think of Le Grand Dame,
Mm-hmm.
and I wonder if you picked up some of the phraseology and was successful in translating it into French.
Might be, and that's,
Ruskin soars in some of his prose, and
I don't want to offend any Ruskinians here, but the reason why we read Ruskin, we the French read Ruskin is not for the translation anymore, but it's because there's a wonderful preface on reading and the notes that Proust wrote, you know, to go along with the text, which actually stifled the text because he was unable to do things in a short way, is the reason why we read Ruskin today, because of what Proust wrote. Really.
yes.
All right, we have time for one more, I think, if anybody has a question. Yes?
I was just curious, how do you, on the translation, how do you translate the experience of eating a madeleine into English?
It Chips Ahoy, is what we do.
Well, there is a
Dipped
new
in Mountain
translation.
Dew.
Yeah. There is a brand new translation of Swan's Way by William Carter. It's just been published at Yale University Press, and with notes, and it's a very interesting translation. It's different from the other ones. So.
What's Madeleine in English?
All right, well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.